Hello, I'm Andrew Gormley and welcome to Crash Course World History number 36. This crash course is about a topic so huge in history, M&Ms. No, I'm kidding. Even though M&Ms were invented in the 1940s, we're talking about World War II here. Topic is the 1940s, a time period that harbored one of the world's most deadliest wars that shook the entire world with ripples that last to this day. 1940 begins with Europe on the brink of complete control by the Germans. It's just Britain and France standing alone against Hitler and his blitzkrieg strategies. France had just begun to fall, then within a couple of months the French were desperately trying to evacuate. By 1940, France had fallen, leaving Britain as the last man standing against the Germans. Meanwhile, over in America, we were just hanging out and selling goods to the British through cash and carry policies, meaning they gave us cash for military supplies, but they had to come pick it up themselves. Though after a while, Britain could no longer afford to keep this up, especially with Germany right on the doorstep and German U-boats sinking ships trying to transport the supplies back. FDR knew that the survival of Britain was in the best interest of the United States, so he attempted to raise support in Congress to let Britain and other allies pay on loan and to let us send them supplies.
Eventually, the Destroyers for Bases deal was passed, in which the U.S. provided destroyer-class ships for some British bases. Finally, in 1941, FDR signed into law the Lend-Lease policy. This act let the U.S. lend much-needed supplies out along with bringing the supplies to the Allies. The U.S. soon becomes the arsenal of democracy with a new booming war industry economy. Yes, me from the past.
When we get to the war part, Mr. Green.
Soon, me from the past. On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese surprisingly attack a major naval base in Hawaii, Pearl Harbor. The attack crippled the U.S. fleet and ultimately sent the U.S. to war. After a year and some planning, the U.S. had its first plan of action ready to go, Operation Torch. It was a campaign which started through landing in Africa and pushing towards Tunisia. The campaign was very rocky and hard at first, but American troops were eventually able to push to Tunisia, where they met up with the English troops who came from the east. From Tunisia, the Allies then staged another landing in Sicily and Italy. The forces pushed slowly up through the rugged terrain.
By 1944, the progress was still slow. The Allies decided to launch another invasion, this time in France. Operation Overlord. The invasion was launched from England across the English Channel on June 7th, also known as D-Day. From there, the U.S. quickly liberated France and pushed fairly easily to the border of Germany. The Germans gave one last major offensive in the Battle of the Bulge. After months of fighting, the Allies marched onward through Germany towards Berlin. However, they were beat to Berlin by the Soviets, who had been pushing from the east after Hitler's betrayal in 1941. On April 30th, 1945, Hitler commits suicide, and VE Day soon follows on May 8th, 1945.
Now let's focus on the theater in the Pacific. After Pearl Harbor, the Japanese invade the Philippines, where U.S. troops are stationed. They defeat the forces there very quickly and take many prisoners, whom General Douglas MacArthur pledges to return one day. The Japanese domination of the Pacific was expanding rapidly and heading towards Australia. The U.S. step in and defeat the Japanese at the Battle of Coral Sea, stopping the Japanese from reaching Australia. From there, the U.S. won the battle at Midway, marking it as a major U.S. victory and a turning point in the war. From Midway, the U.S. pushed to Guadalcanal, where they destroy a huge portion of the Japanese fleet. They soon become known as the island hopping techniques. Let's take a closer look.
Go.
Island hopping is a technique of attacking only the necessary islands, leaving the heavily guarded ones behind. The United States does this all throughout the Pacific. Along the way comes MacArthur's promised return to the Philippines with the Battle of Leyte Gulf. The battle also brings about a major loss to the Japanese fleet, which is basically gone. Now the only major obstacles in the way of the U.S. are the islands of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The two battles turn out to have a large amount of casualties, but they finally set the United States in position to launch attacks on the Japanese homeland.
One of the reasons the casualties were so high is because the Japanese government propagandized the people of the islands and the soldiers so badly that they thought the American troops were going to rape them, going to be cannibals, eat them alive, and they just did not want to die like that, so they committed suicide or fought to the very last man, woman, and children, and so the Americans lost many, many soldiers because the Japanese would not surrender, even if it was for the better. Harry S. Truman, who was sworn in after the death of FDR, is faced with a hard decision on how to end the war. Either risk U.S. lives in an invasion of Japan, or introduce a new weapon, the atomic bomb, which was made by Robert Oppenheimer and tested in the Los Alamos territory in Nevada. After Japan's refusal to surrender, Truman gives the okay to drop the atomic bombs. The first one is dropped from the Enola Gay on August 6th on Hiroshima, Japan. The city is leveled. Although Japan still refused to surrender, the Americans dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki. After Nagasaki, Japanese decided to surrender. The war was over. The bomb was very controversial, but Truman had this to say about it in a letter to a reporter. It was done to save 125,000 youngsters on the American side and 125,000 on the Japanese side from getting killed, and that is what it did. It probably also saved 500,000 youngsters on both sides from being maimed from the war.
During this time, on the home front, very important things were going on. War production was bumped up rapidly. Industries such as the automobile industry boomed because of tank production, and people came together to make sacrifices for the war effort. Labor unions pledged not to strike, people grew victory gardens like on World War I, and people bought bonds, rationed, and even women joined the workforce in an expanded role. When women joined the workforce, their families often made sacrifices as well. With the mom being gone, a large number of kids became 8-hour orphans with no mom to watch them. This led to government childcare. This industrial boom also brought about the Great Migration. No, not that kind of migration. The migration of African Americans from the South towards the newly opened industrial jobs.
And now for the mystery document. In this period of power politics, nothing counts but pressure. More pressure and still more pressure. Through the tactic and strategy of broad, organized, aggressive mass action behind the vital and important issues of the Negro. To this end, we propose that 10,000 Negroes march on Washington for jobs in national defense and equal integration in the fighting forces of the United States. An all-out thundering march on Washington, ending in a monster and huge demonstration at Lincoln Monument, will shake up white America. It will shake up official Washington. It will give encouragement to our white friends to fight all the harder by our side, with us for a righteous cause. It will gain respect for the Negro people. It will create a new sense of self-respect among Negroes. But what of national unity? We believe in national unity which recognizes equal opportunity for black and white citizens to jobs in national defense and the armed forces and in all other institutions and endeavors in America. We condemn all dictatorships, fascist, Nazi, and communist. We are loyal, patriotic Americans all. But if American democracy will not defend its defenders, if American democracy will not protect its protectors, if American democracy will not give jobs to its toilers because of race or color, if American democracy will not ensure equality of opportunity, freedom, and justice to its citizens, black and white, it is a hollow mockery and belies the principles for which it is supposed to stand. Well, it is not FDR or Truman. It is not a German or Japanese or English or any other nationality. It's American, most likely a Negro. Probably in the army because he talks about whites fighting harder by our side. March on Washington. I can't think of any black soldiers, but I can guess A. Philip Randolph.
What's the document name?
March on Washington by F. Philip Randolph.
No, but it's close.
Currently was A. Philip Randolph with the Call to Negro America. Though it's important to know, not all Americans were happy during World War II. Some African Americans used the war as a fight for civil rights. Such campaign movements known as the Double V campaign. A. Philip Randolph was the main activist for this during the time. His call for a march on Washington ended up being pretty effective. The threat of this march pressured President Roosevelt to pass Fair Employment Practice Committee under Executive Order 8802. The order banned discrimination employment practices by federal agencies and all unions and companies engaged in war-related work. Also, African Americans weren't the only ones being discriminated against during the war. After Pearl Harbor, people had lots of anger towards Japanese Americans in the U.S. President Roosevelt responded with Executive Order 9066, the internment of all Japanese Americans. They lost everything: their homes, their businesses, their friends. One Japanese man even attempted to sue the U.S. for this atrocity through the court case Korematsu vs. U.S., but the Supreme Court upheld the internment camps, making them legal. This decision leaves one of the biggest black stains on American reputation in FDR's presidency. However, FDR was widely popular among the people, so in the election of 1944, FDR easily wins. A couple months into his presidency, the nation is shocked by his death, leaving Truman as the new president. FDR had unfinished business such as his 4 freedoms: a freedom of speech, a freedom of fear, a freedom from want, and the freedom of religion. He also left behind his second Bill of Rights. The 1940s and World War II changed the world forever. It is seen as the beginning of the Cold War, the forerunner to civil rights movements, the end of the Depression, and cost the U.S. over 400,000 people. The losses should not be remembered just as a statistic, but be remembered for what they sacrificed. They fought for their country, and it toppled dictatorships that threatened the whole world. The war leaves us with this burning question: how would the United States' increased globalization affect their future foreign policy and their role as a new global superpower?
Give me fuel, give me fire, give me that which I desire. Ooh.